Hey all, wanted to talk about, imagine this, going to a hearing, prevailing on the hearing, kind of, with a closed period. So you're at a hearing, you testify, all the evidence that you have is in, and maybe your hearing is, say, in late 2018, and the judge finds through decision later that you were in fact disabled under a listing even for the prior period, but it ended in the middle of 2017. You might say, well, how could it end? I've been as terribly off then as I am now, in my opinion. Well, here's the one I'm looking at now. And ironically, I have a hearing coming up on this case on a newer time period. I wasn't around for the old thing, but many years later now, had filed a new claim on behalf of this younger individual. It's a mental health claim. There are physical problems, but they wouldn't take a younger person out of all work. They wouldn't take him out of, for instance, sedentary or light work. So the theory of the case is that the mental impairments that provided a listing level of a mental impairment, you know, 7 years ago, ending 7 years ago, is the same one today. The person has not worked despite the closed period. And a closed period, just to remind you, is when a judge finds the person was disabled for a certain amount of the period he claimed for, but that he or she improved enough to no longer be disabled as of a certain date. And that's what happened in this person's case, prior case, not the current one we have now. It's the kind of case that is very difficult. And as many of you know, I take a certain amount of younger people cases, knowing it's going to be 10 times more work and half the results, just by the nature of the law. But going back to it, wanted to see what happened before. And the reason why the person got a closed period is because as of the date that the judge decided it was closed in 2017, so there's about 2 years of disability, the individual no longer had medical evidence that described him as being troubled. And what I suspect this means, because I don't have all that old evidence from the case, I just have the decision and the list of exhibits. So it looks like that is the last day of medical records from the mental health provider, the medications person, which was, it's the same person he has now. And they, I guess through that date, had described the impulsiveness, the irritability, the, inability to stay on task, pay attention, what they see in their sessions. And then there was no more submitted. So when that happens, guys, that's another version of a gap. So let's say the hearing is a year later and you never got those updated records for the last year, and they showed a disabled person before, the judge is not going to presume that you are still at the same level of impairment prior if there's that gap, because there's nothing to base it on. So whether you stop treating or just never got the records, it's possible that a judge could leave the record open for a little bit after a hearing for you to go get those records if you in fact did go. Or it could also be where the records after a certain date, whether you have a different provider that notates differently, which is unfortunate. If you get one of those mental health providers that say that everything is within normal limits, guess what? You're normal, you're not disabled. So, you have to pay attention to these things. You need to scour your records and really read them and compare. Does this sound more innocuous from an objective point of view, not from really your point of view? And, speak to your provider. If all you're seeing is mental status exams at each session that say within normal limits and no complaints, and mood is normal, and affect is normal, appearance is fine, so you have to really do your own due diligence, or have a representative who will do it for you. But When those records get weak, that could land you with a closed period. So this person had a closed period, and it's been, what are we at now? 7 years later, trying to show that at this point in time, the person is disabled. It is an uphill challenge, largely because mental health providers don't provide decent articulation of the person's problems. We are hoping for a directed medical source statement from the treating provider, where the actual questions that the SSA needs to know about to determine the level of severity of the impairment and where the limitations are on certain work-related tasks related to mental capacities. Those questions have been posed, so I'm hoping to get something back in that regard. I think the provider has been very cooperative in prior years for the patient, which I say kudos, because a lot of them won't lift a finger outside their minimum required basic checkbox. The person showed up, we filed for the insurance, and we got paid, So it's the ones that actually describe the person that are really doing justice for their person, even if it is where they think, much improvement, and, if the person's truly not anxious when they're there, or hasn't been irritable, hasn't been reporting any kind of, symptoms while at home. It can go a variety of ways, but the ones that just automatically for years say everything's within normal limits, you kind of want to ask them, then why is that person there? What are you doing? Can the person go and do a bang up job? Can he go be a rocket scientist? Because he has no impairments according to your treatment notes. I mean, you have diagnosed things, but that doesn't mean they affect his capacity to do work, because you say everything's normal. So anywho, that's what resulted in a closed period, because I'm reading it now and I'm matching up the dates of the last day that any records said the person was having difficulties of a notable amount, not being able to control maybe impulses, anger, irritability, things of that nature. And of course, it's all combined with the totality of the rest of the evidence, which included hospitalizations prior to that, but there hadn't been a hospitalization in over a year, etc. So that's where you're at. If your medical records suddenly shift from bad to good, or far less bad, you could go from listing to non-listing, and then non-listing is really hard to win when you're a young person. Very, very hard. You have to have very, very detailed records with regard to, not just that the person has anxiety or OCD, the level, examples, so that the examples can then be kind of extrapolated to what would happen in the workforce, in the workplace. So what kind of workplaces would be not going to work with that kind of symptomology? But we don't see it a lot, sadly. But anyway, just want to let you know about that. You could be walking out of a partially favorable award after your hearing, and then you'll get some back benefits, presumably, unless they're eaten up by something else that you owed, and you're still sitting there with no monthly benefits because it was a closed period. So it can be frustrating. All right, that's enough for that. Closed periods, guys. Bye.